Ever since Belgian midfielder Jean-Marc Bosman took RFC Liège in the Belgian FA to the European Court of Justice and won in 1995, footballers have been free to join new clubs free of charge after their contracts expire. Football, and especially transfers, would never be the same again. Over the next decade, some of the biggest and best moves in the game were free transfers. Edgar Davids and Michael Reiziger both joined AC Milan on free transfers from Ajax in 1996, as Gianluca Vialli joined Chelsea from Juventus. Steve McManaman broke Liverpool hearts by joining Real Madrid on a free in 1999, and Sol Campbell completed the most controversial free transfer in history in 2001, leaving Spurs to join their North London rivals Arsenal during the same window that Lyon snapped up Brazilian free-kick maestro Juninho free of charge from Vasco da Gama. There haven't been too many more memorable free transfers than JJ Okocha, who Big Sam somehow convinced to join Bolton Wanderers on a free from PSG in 2002. Meanwhile, Cafu became one of the game's greatest ever free transfers in 2003, when he joined AC Milan from Roma, and City rivals Inter pulled off a similarly impressive coup in 2004, snapping up future club legend Esteban Cambiasso after his contract expired at Real Madrid. That is a very brief rundown of the first 10 years of free transfers, but long-time subscriber, Dougie Afroman, has been requesting that I make a video on, quote, the best free transfer in Premier League / World Football every year from 2005 to 2025. He has got a fair few likes, and I think that it's a decent idea. I am, of course, not going to restrict myself solely to the Premier League. Where would be the fun in that? Plus, that probably wouldn't have even taken me an entire day to research. And, to be clear, I am sticking to Dougie Afroman's request, so it is on a year-by-year rather than a season-by-season basis. There will be lots of honourable mentions thrown in throughout. You probably won't agree with all of my inclusions, and I am bound to have missed someone at some stage, but that's all part of the fun. Without further ado then, who moved on several free transfers but was never close to being the best in a calendar year, here is the best free transfer in world football every year, from 2005 to 2025. 2005. Luis Figo. It was a toss-up between Luis Figo and Mark van Bommel in 2005. Van Bommel joined Barcelona on a free transfer from PSV in the summer of 2005, linking up with compatriot and fellow former defensive midfielder Frank Rijkaard. The Dutchman only spent a single season in Catalonia, but what a memorable season it was. When he was unveiled at the Camp Nou, Van Bommel surprised reporters and supporters alike by speaking fluent Spanish, having dedicated himself to learning the language in anticipation of the move all summer. On the pitch, Van Bommel provided steel alongside Ed Milson at the base of the Barcelona midfield, doing the dirty work, which allowed the likes of Andres Iniesta, Samuel Eto'o, and Ronaldinho to flourish. Barcelona lifted a Champions League and La Liga double in Van Bommel's only season at the club, but at the end of the campaign, facing competition from academy graduates like Thiago Motta and Xavi in the Barcelona midfield, Van Bommel joined Bayern Munich as a replacement for Owen Hargreaves for €6 million. An outstanding free transfer, no doubt about it, but Luis Figo's move to Inter Milan just about edges it, certainly in terms of longevity, legacy, and honours won. After signing Figo for a world record-breaking €62 million from rivals Barcelona in 2000, in what remains probably the most controversial transfer in the history of the sport, it feels somewhat unusual that Madrid lost Figo for nothing after just 5 years, not least given the fact that he signed a 6-year contract in 2000. Following 5 memorable seasons at the Bernabeu, Figo fell out with short-lived Madrid boss Vanderlei Luxemburgo, who dropped him in pre-season. Figo was replaced by Luxemburgo's compatriot Robinho, who inherited his number 10 shirt. Liverpool had initially attempted to sign Figo in 2005, but they pulled out when Real Madrid demanded a fee. When Roberto Mancini and Inter Milan came calling by contrast, Madrid agreed to mutually terminate Figo's contract, allowing him to join Inter for nothing. Repurposed at the San Siro as a majestic playmaker in number 10, as opposed to a fleet-footed wide man, that extended Figo's career by several years. Having initially penned just a 2-year deal at Inter, Figo ended up sticking around for 4 years, during which time he made 140 appearances, won 4 Serie A titles, and won the club's Player of the Year award in his debut campaign. Figo retired when his 4 years at Inter came to an end, the season before the Nerazzurri won Italian football's first and only continental treble, under Jose Mourinho. An honourable mention goes to Adriano, as well as Mark van Bommel, who joined Juventus on a free transfer following his cocaine-fueled contract fiasco at Chelsea in 2005, scored 11 goals in his only season at the club, and was flogged for €8 million to Fiorentina. Not bad business. Certainly better business than he was for Chelsea. 2006. Robert Perez. One of the trickiest decisions in this entire video was deciding between Michael Ballack's move to Chelsea and Robert Perez joining Villarreal, both on free transfers, in 2006. Obviously on free transfers, otherwise they wouldn't have been eligible, and it wouldn't have been a tricky decision at all. Ballack was a real coup for Chelsea, still one of the best midfielders in the world at the time, aged 29, even if his wages were enormous. He spent 4 seasons at Stamford Bridge, where he played a very different role to the one that he had done at Bayern Munich, Bayer Leverkusen, and with the German national team. I think some people think Ballack was a bit of a disappointment at the Bridge, because they expected an all-action midfielder who danced past players and smashed in 20 goals a season, but Ballack was a little bit older, and Chelsea already had plenty of goals in midfield, courtesy of Frank Lampard, so that wasn't really what Jose Mourinho wanted from him. Mourinho found a new role for Ballack, and, alongside Lampard and Michael Essien, the German formed one-third of an outstanding midfield trio that won 6 trophies over the next 4 years, before rejoining Leverkusen. Perez nicks it though, having enjoyed a superb renaissance in La Liga with Villarreal, having had much lower expectations. Similar to Figo in some respects, having played on the left wing for Arsenal in his prime, where he combined beautifully with Thierry Henry, Perez found himself playing centrally at El Madrigal, and to devastating effect. Incredibly gifted and intelligent, following an injury-plagued debut campaign, in which Villarreal finished 5th, Perez was instrumental in Villarreal's all-time high second-place finish in La Liga the following season, 10 points above Barcelona, and in the 2 Champions League campaigns that followed. He made 131 appearances in total, followed by, it must be said, a much less impressive stint at Aston Villa. 2007. David Beckham. I deliberated about this one for a while, because David Beckham's 2007 move from Real Madrid to LA Galaxy was far from an unmitigated success story. Hampered by injuries at times, both Beckham's performance levels and commitment were questioned early on in his time in Los Angeles, up to and including his controversial loan move to AC Milan, so much so that he was met by protests and even booed by some sections of the Galaxy support. Nonetheless, Beckham was by far the biggest coup in the history of Major League Soccer. He went on to play a starring role in back-to-back MLS Cup wins in his last 2 seasons, and he did have an enormous impact upon soccer in the United States. As part of Beckham's MLS contract, he was also given the right to form his own MLS franchise for a majorly discounted fee, which he activated with the founding of Inter Miami, where he played a key role in signing probably the only bigger MLS coup than himself, with the arrival of Lionel Messi. Honourable mentions go to more conventionally impressive free transfers, like Tunchai to Middlesbrough, the ever-underrated Sylvan Distan to Portsmouth, Roberto Ayala to Real Zaragoza, and Roberto Carlos to Fenerbahce. This was also the year in which Javier Saviola controversially joined Real Madrid from Barcelona on a free, but he wasn't very good, and therefore doesn't feature. I'm not even sure why I brought him up, to be totally honest. Just some additional free transfer trivia, I guess. 2008. Tomas Ushalushi. There weren't too many blockbuster free transfers in 2008 if truth be told. Mathieu Flamini joined AC Milan on a free from Arsenal, where he was solid enough. Barcelona brought in Jose Manuel Pinto on a free from Celta Vigo, who was only ever a backup to Victor Valdez, but reportedly played a key role in terms of team spirit and squad morale, and Swedish centre-back Olof Mellberg left Aston Villa to spend a single memorable season at Juventus. It is another centre-back, Tomas Ushalushi, who was probably the outstanding free transfer of 2008 though. An uncompromising central defender who was adored for his dedication and aggression almost everywhere that he went, Ushalushi's 3 years at Atletico Madrid were no exception. Signed before Diego Simeone's appointment, but fully befitting of the Argentine spirit and ideals, Ushalushi joined Atleti after his contract at Fiorentina expired. Age 30 when he joined the club, Ushalushi played a key role in Atleti's 2010 Europa League crown, racking up more than 130 appearances in total. Never the most graceful or delicate in possession of the ball, it would probably be fair to say. In a team which starred attacking talent like Sergio Aguero and Diego Forlan, Ushalushi formed ironclad partnerships with the likes of Luis Pereira and a young Diego Godin during his time in Madrid. Ushalushi is perhaps best remembered for a straight red card that he received for planting his studs directly into Lionel Messi's ankle in 2010, but he apologised for it at the time, and it has been 15 years, so I think that we can all move on and accept the fact that, from a not very crowded field, he was possibly the best free transfer of 2008. Well, certainly, it is between him and Giovanni to Hull City. It's actually Giovanni to Hull City, if we're being honest, but I just couldn't be bothered with the accusations of bias in the comments. Ushalushi was a donkey compared to that Brazilian genius. Anyway, moving on. 2009. Adriano. Most people probably think of Adriano as being finished by 2009, and in Europe, he was. The Brazilian, who was touted as Ronaldo's heir apparent and appeared to have the world at his feet in the mid-2000s, saw his career fall apart in his early to mid-20s, owing to the grief of his father's passing and, ultimately, a serious ankle injury from which he struggled to recover. As Adriano himself poetically put it, he had a hole in his ankle and another one in his soul. Adriano described his explosiveness and balance as being over after that setback, and in 2006 and 2007, he won back-to-back Bidon d'Oro awards, an award which is supposedly given to the worst player in Serie A each season, which roughly translates into English as the Golden Bin. He followed that up with just 4 league goals over the next 18 months, blighted by injuries, but in 2009, Adriano rejoined his boyhood club Flamengo. Briefly, the big Brazilian managed to stay relatively fit and appeared to be enjoying his football again. Though far from his unstoppable best, in which he was arguably the most feared centre-forward on the planet, Adriano scored 34 goals in only 51 games for Flamengo, topping the Campeonato Brasileiro Serie A scoring charts, and inspiring Flamengo to a first Brazilian title since 1992, up from 5th the previous season without him. He took another stab at European football with Roma in 2010, but it all ended in tears. And his second spell at Flamengo was the last time that we saw a top-class Adriano. Honourable mentions go to Goran Pandev's move to Inter Milan, Alejandro Dominguez to Valencia, a deal which was completed in 2009, though he was only registered in 2010, Ivica Olic to Bayern Munich, Andrei Shevchenko's homecoming at Dynamo Kyiv, and, at a stretch, maybe, Michael Owen's controversial move to Manchester United. 2010. Raul. There were lots of good free transfers in 2010. Liverpool signed Maxi Rodriguez after his contract expired with Atletico Madrid. The New York Red Bulls brought Thierry Henry to Major League Soccer. Fluminense took Deco back to Brazil. Ruud van Nistelrooy signed for Hamburg. Michael Ballack was on the move again, this time back to Leverkusen. And Dynamo Moscow signed Kevin Karanyi from Schalke. It was a Schalke signing, rather than a departee, who was the year's standout free though. Following 16 years, 741 games, and 323 goals in the Real Madrid first team, Raul's time at the Bernabeu had come to an end. Incoming head coach Jose Mourinho wanted him to stay on, but fearing a lack of game time and not wanting to sully his reputation with the Real Madrid supporters, Raul decided not to renew his contract. He joined German giant Schalke as a replacement for the departing Karanyi, and over the next 2 seasons, Raul's last playing in Europe, he scored 40 goals and made 21 assists in 98 appearances. Aged 33 to 35, Raul averaged a goal contribution once every 140 minutes, as well as leading by example and lifting all of those around him, playing a starring role as Schalke won the DFB Pokal and finished 3rd in the Bundesliga. In his second season, Raul formed a phenomenal partnership as a second striker, alongside Dutchman Klaas-Jan Huntelaar, who scored 48 goals that season in 48 games. A dishonourable mention goes to Joe Cole, who joined Liverpool on a free transfer in 2010 and, though undoubtedly a great player at his best, was woeful at Anfield on enormous wages and must go down as one of the worst free transfers of all time. 2011. Andrea Pirlo. Quite simply one of the greatest free transfers of all time. An honourable mention should probably go to Philippe Mexes, who joined AC Milan on a free from Roma in 2011, but in truth, there was very little competition. Whilst Milan gained Mexes, a perfectly okay centre-back with a penchant for the occasional wonder goal, they lost perhaps the greatest playmaker on the planet. Following 13 years at the San Siro, the last 10 of them with AC Milan, in which Pirlo racked up more than 400 appearances, won 2 Champions Leagues, and was named as the man of the match in a World Cup final, the Rossoneri allowed arguably their best player to leave them for nothing, not convinced that he was worthy of a new deal. Pirlo was restricted to just 17 league appearances in his final season in Milan, with Massimiliano Allegri preferring Mark van Bommel at the base of his midfield, often forcing Pirlo onto the left of a midfield three. AC Milan's loss was Juventus' gain though, with Gianluigi Buffon once commenting, quote, "When Andrea told me that he was joining us, the first thing I thought was, God exists. A player of his level and ability, not to mention that he was free, I think he was the signing of the century." End quote. Pirlo made 164 appearances over the next 4 seasons, forming a world-class midfield diamond alongside Claudio Marchisio, Paul Pogba, and Arturo Vidal, in which he was the key cog in the whole operation. Having finished 7th, 24 points behind AC Milan, and failed to even qualify for Europe the season before Pirlo arrived, Juve won the Scudetto in all 4 of Pirlo's seasons there, the last of which, ironically, came under the management of Massimiliano Allegri. Milan, meanwhile, fell to 2nd, 3rd, 8th, and eventually 10th over the next 4 seasons without him. 2012. Paul Pogba. Speak of the devil, another 25% of Juventus' outstanding midfield quartet for 3 years features for 2012, making it back-to-back Juventus inclusions. Arturo Vidal was actually the only one of the 4 who commanded a fee, as Pirlo and Pogba were both free transfers, meanwhile Marchisio came through Juve's own youth ranks, and even Vidal only cost them €10.5 million. That is pretty incredible business when you think about it. During his 4 years at Juve, Pogba was one of the best midfielders in the world. There was a lot of rewriting of history after Manchester United signed him for a world record-breaking fee to suggest that he hadn't been that impressive at Juve, and by the same token, I also sometimes see rage bait of people claiming that Pogba is the best midfielder of all time, better than Modric, Iniesta or Zidane. Both claims are undiluted horse piss, but Pogba was an extremely rare breed at his very best. Quick and tall, Pogba was blessed with fantastic athleticism, the dribbling ability of a flashy 5'5" winger, the vision of a world-class playmaker, and he even had a sharp eye for goal. Juventus signed all of that for nothing after Pogba became frustrated with the lack of game time at Man United. They got 178 games and 8 trophies out of him over 4 years, and then they flogged him back to Man United for a world record-breaking £89 million. As free transfers go, it is among the best of all time. Honourable mentions go to Porto signing Lucho Gonzalez and AC Milan picking up Ricardo Montolivo for nothing, but this one was a very easy choice. 2013. Fernando Urente. Maybe the most controversial free transfer in this list, unless you count me mentioning Sol Campbell in the intro, not many players turn their backs on Athletic Club. A unique club in the world, as they call themselves, Athletic relies solely upon Basque players, and Fernando Urente came through the club's youth ranks from the age of 11. Following more than 300 appearances, and a fantastic 29-goal season though, Urente caught the eye of Juventus, but the Italians only offered Athletic €16 million. With relatively large cash reserves and a healthy balance sheet, Athletic have a policy of only selling players that they want to keep when their release clauses are met, and Llorente's was €32 million. Juve wouldn't go above 20 million, so Athletic brought in Aritz Aduriz, and for the last year of his deal, Llorente was benched, serving as Aduritz's reserve. At the end of the season, he finally joined Juventus, where he scored 18 goals in 45 games in his debut campaign, forming a strong partnership with Carlos Tevez in lifting the Scudetto. Llorente's second season was a little bit less impressive, but he still features for 2013 ahead of Samuel Eto'o, who scored 12 goals in 35 games for Chelsea after signing on a free, in a year which wasn't exactly blessed with many elite free transfers. 2014. Robert Lewandowski. Statistically at least, probably the greatest free transfer of all time, Bayern Munich took Robert Lewandowski from their biggest domestic rivals for nothing, and over the next 8 years, he scored 344 goals in 375 games, cementing his status as one of the greatest strikers, and indeed players, of his generation. Signed by Dortmund from Lech Poznan in 2010, after a season adjusting to a higher standard of football in the Bundesliga, Lewandowski never looked back. He scored 94 goals over the next 3 seasons, but in February 2013, 17 months before he actually left the club, Dortmund director Michael Zorc revealed that Lewandowski wouldn't be extending his contract. Dortmund had the option to sell Lewandowski in the summer of 2013, with Bayern Munich reportedly offering them €25 million, but they chose to mount a title challenge and keep hold of him for one more season instead. Lewandowski scored 28 goals, but Dortmund missed out on both the Bundesliga title and lost in the final of the DFB Pokal against Lewandowski's next club Bayern Munich. The Polish legend, who is currently in self-imposed exile from the national team, became even more prolific in Munich, where he won 8 Bundesliga titles in 8 seasons, topping the Bundesliga scoring chart 6 times, having already done so once at Dortmund, and becoming both Bayern and the Bundesliga's second highest scorer of all time, trailing only Gerd Müller on both fronts. The likes of Bibas Nacho, Jeremy Menez, Bakary Sagna, and Manuel Fernandes all earn honourable mentions, but the distance between them and Lewandowski is about as great as the distance between how good Ricky Gervais thinks that everything he's made since The Office is, and how good it actually is. Alright, maybe it's not quite that big, but it is close. 2015. Andre Pierre Gignac. There is a natural Eurocentrism to some of these lists as a result of both A, me being European and following European football more closely than football anywhere else, and B, Europe being the dominant force in world football right now for largely economic reasons. Nonetheless, seeing off Andre Ayew's move to Swansea, Sami Khedira joining Juventus, Hatem Ben Arfa's renaissance at Nice, and, most notably, James Milner's move from Man City to Liverpool, is quite frankly one of the most iconic free transfers in the history of Latin American football. Andre Pierre Gignac was a major figure in French football for a decade, racking up 36 caps for the national team, and rivaling Olivier Giroud for the number 9 shirt, owing to Didier Deschamps' very well documented love of a big man up top. When Gignac's contract at Marseille expired, after 81 goals in 193 games, including 20 plus goals in each of his last 2 seasons, the target man likely wasn't short of options. The likes of Lyon, Galatasaray, Besiktas, and even Inter Milan were all linked, which is why there was some surprise when Gignac, still aged only 29, joined Liga MX side Tigres instead. Over the next 10 years, however, Gignac became a Tigres legend. At a massive club that had only ever won a few Liga MX titles, Gignac scored 219 goals in 407 games, including a career-best 33 goals in his debut campaign, winning 12 trophies, including 5 league titles. Now aged 39, Gignac's contract with Tigres is about to expire while he recovers from injury, with reports that, if he chooses to retire, he will likely be appointed to a leadership role at the club. James Milner was brilliant for 8 years at Liverpool and could just as easily have featured, but I think Gignac's legacy at Tigres is even more impressive, so he features for 2015. 2016. Joel Matip. It was another tricky decision between the obvious inclusion and what I think is, very narrowly, the right inclusion for 2016. The obvious pick would have been Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who joined Manchester United on a free transfer from PSG and scored 28 goals in 46 games, after some people had doubted his ability to produce in the Premier League as a 35-year-old. Ibrahimovic was brilliant at Old Trafford, but only for a single season. Joel Matip, by contrast, a much less high-profile arrival for Liverpool from Schalke, spent 8 years at Anfield, racked up over 200 appearances, and won the Premier League, the Champions League, the FA Cup, and the EFL Cup. He even won the same number of Premier League Player of the Month awards as Ibrahimovic, so, though less dazzling, I think that Matip has to go down as a better free transfer overall. Honourable mentions go to Andrea Pirlo joining Benfica from Sporting, taking a metaphorical dump in the mouth of every Sporting fan. If you know, you know. Ava Banega's move to Inter Milan, and Mario Balotelli joining Nice where, like Hatem Ben Arfa, he was actually quite good. 2017. Jesus Navas. An easy choice, ahead of Wayne Rooney's return to Everton, Branislav Ivanovic's move to Zenit St. Petersburg, and Sardar Azmoun joining Rubin Kazan, Jesus Navas' homecoming at Sevilla exceeded any and all expectations. Already beloved in Seville, at least by the red and white half of the Andalusian capital, Navas won both the Copa del Rey and the Europa League twice in his first stint with his boyhood club as a fleet-footed right-winger, preceding a £15 million move to Man City. Not terrible by any means, but also not especially memorable or exceptional during his 4 seasons at the Etihad, when Navas returned, free of charge in 2017, soon to turn 32 years old. Most people probably expected a brief swan song. Instead, Navas was reborn, often as a right-back or right-sided wing-back, appointed as club captain ahead of the 2018-19 season, and playing a starring role as Sevilla won 2 more Europa League titles, a competition which they have won 7 times, whilst no one else has won it more than thrice. Navas made the La Liga Team of the Season in 2018-19, and he played 312 games back at Sevilla, taking his overall tally for the club up to 705 before retiring last Christmas. 2018. Stefan Devry. The toughest call in this entire video, for me at least, was between Leon Goretzka and Stefan Devry in 2018. Goretzka was touted as the next Michael Ballack at Schalke, where he was outstanding, before Bayern signed him for nothing, and whilst he has turned out to be something quite different to Ballack, becoming a physical and athletic monster in Munich, he has already played over 250 games for one of the best teams in the world, still aged only 30. Meanwhile, De Vrij never had Goretzka's ceiling, but he was viewed as a real coup when Inter signed him for nothing, following 4 excellent seasons at Lazio, and he has been a rock in a quite often brilliant Inter Milan team over the last 8 years. You can take your pick, but De Vrij has been mammoth for an Inter Milan team that has won 2 Scudettos and reached 2 Champions League finals, making a more pivotal impact, I would argue, than Goretzka at Bayern, just about, so I have lent very narrowly towards him. Shoutouts to Lucas Lima, who joined Palmeiras, and Emre Can, who joined Juventus, also in 2018. 2019. Alberto Moreno. The worst year for free transfers since the Bosman ruling. There were no shortage of fairly high-profile frees in 2019. Falcao to Galatasaray, Hector Herrera to Atletico, Ander Herrera to PSG, Adrian Rabiot to Juventus, and Aaron Ramsey also to Juventus, to name but a few, but none of them went especially well. Alberto Moreno's free transfer to Villarreal was hardly Pirlo or Lewandowski to Bayern or Juve then, but it was a solid move, which worked out for everyone involved. Following 5 years at Liverpool, Moreno had been thoroughly dislodged by Andy Robertson, only making 2 Premier League appearances in his final season with the club. Moreno made 124 appearances over the next 5 years at Villarreal, despite injury setbacks, lifting a Europa League title in 2021 after beating Man United in the final, after which Moreno took to social media to bait Man United fans owing to his Liverpool connection. Moreno left Villarreal in 2024 and now plays for Como. 2020. Thiago Silva. Following the barren wilderness of 2019, in which there were fewer great free transfers than there were deadly viruses discovered in the Chinese city of Wuhan, 2020 was a vintage year for frees. With revenues down due to matches being postponed, cancelled, and played behind closed doors during the pandemic, the free transfer had never been more important. Brighton snapped up Danny Welbeck, released following a disappointing spell at Watford, who has been a revelation on the south coast over the last 5 seasons, Alexis Sanchez found some form again at Inter Milan, following an abysmal stint at Old Trafford. Benfica signed a 33-year-old Jan Vertonghen, who had 2 really solid seasons in Lisbon. Real Sociedad brought the dazzling David Silva back to La Liga for the last 3 years of his career, and Max Cruz joined Union Berlin after terminating his contract at Fenerbahce, where he played a starring role, topping the club's scoring charts, as Union finished 7th in the Bundesliga. All are usurped, though, and quite comfortably, to be totally honest, by the brilliance of Thiago Silva at Chelsea. Silva was, of course, an immensely highly rated centre-back at PSG, AC Milan and Fluminense, but on the verge of turning 36 when he joined the Blues, you could have been forgiven for expecting him to only play a bit-part role for a season or 2 at most. In actual fact, Silva would become one of the best and most consistent centre-backs in the Premier League, if not in all of Europe, for the next 4 years, leaving Chelsea in 2024, months before his 40th birthday, with 155 appearances for the club to his name, a Champions League title that had eluded him at both PSG and in Milan, and a Chelsea Player of the Year award. Silva rejoined Fluminense over a year ago, signing a 2-year deal that will keep him at the club until he's almost 42. There have been few better players than Silva in their late 30s and early 40s during my lifetime. 2021. Gianluigi Donnarumma. As player power has further increased, and clubs have become more savvy in the transfer market, and more conscious of PSR and other spending regulations, free transfers, even of younger players in or approaching their primes, have become much more ubiquitous, as I covered previously in an entire video. Well worth a watch, that video, if you ask me. But I would say that, wouldn't I? 2021 was another vintage year for free agents then. David Alaba joined Real Madrid from Bayern Munich, Hakan Çalhanoğlu left AC Milan for their city rivals Inter, and Lionel Messi left Barcelona after 21 years, owing to the club's financial and regulatory woes, joining PSG. Elsewhere, the likes of Pedro, Elser Hassai, Rui Silva, João Mario, and Lee Kang-in all proved to be very shrewd signings on frees. Either Alaba or Çalhanoğlu could have featured, but following a mixed first 2 seasons in Paris, which weren't free of criticism, Gianluigi Donnarumma has become one of the best goalkeepers in the world over the last couple of years. He was arguably already that at the age of about 16, but Donnarumma is now more mature, more assured, and, most importantly, much more consistent. Arguably the best shot stopper on the planet, and certainly one of the best too, Donnarumma nearly left AC Milan on a free transfer while still in his teens, as the late Mino Raiola demanded a world record wage for a player under the age of 20. Donnarumma got it in the end, but he didn't stick around for long, turning down all subsequent contract offers and becoming one of the highest paid keepers on the planet at a club who, from 2021 onwards, had the highest wage bill on the planet and in the history of the sport. He also just won the Champions League, playing a starring role in an absolutely dazzling PSG team and keeping them in the competition at times, so maybe there is some recency bias there, but on the balance of things, given his age and what he could still go on to achieve at PSG, compared to Alaba and Çalhanoğlu in Madrid and Milan, I think that he deserves to feature. 2022. Randall Kolomoi. A lot of the inclusions in this list were brilliant free transfers because they had great performances, longevity, legacies, and accomplishments at the clubs who signed them for nothing. In other instances, however, players can be brilliant signings primarily from an economic standpoint. Or, in the case of Paul Pogba, both of the above. Make no mistake, Randall Kolomoi was very good for Eintracht Frankfurt after joining the Germans on a free transfer from Nantes, otherwise he wouldn't have commanded such a crazy fee, but the fact that they signed him for nothing and sold him for 75 million euros, rising to 85 million subject to add-ons after a single season, is the primary reason why he features. Kolomoi scored 26 goals and made 17 assists in 50 appearances during his short stay in Manhattan, making the Bundesliga team of the season and topping the DFB Pokal scoring charts as Eintracht reached the final. His time in Paris has been a little bit less impressive to date, despite being among the 40 most expensive footballers of all time, and he spent the second half of this season on loan at Juventus, whilst his parent club lifted the Champions League. Honourable mentions go to Antonio Rudiger to Real Madrid, Andrea Pirlo to Inter Milan, for similar reasons to Kolo Muani, when you think of his one brilliant season and the enormous profit that Inter made on him, Alessio Romagnoli to Lazio, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang to Barcelona, again, even more briefly very prolific and then sold for a decent profit, Paulo Dybala to Roma, Boubacar Kamara to Aston Villa, and Matthias Ginter to Freiburg. As I said, a vintage year for free transfers. 2023, Marcus Thuram. Inter Milan signings in the form of Hakan Çalhanoğlu and Andre Onana just missed out in 2021 and 2022, but where they failed, Marcus Thuram succeeds for 2023. Following 4 years at Borussia Mönchengladbach, the towering Italian-born French international, whose father was one of the greatest defenders of his generation, told the Bundesliga side that he wouldn't be renewing his contract. The likes of Manchester United, Chelsea and PSG reportedly all made Thuram offers, but it was Inter, in search of a replacement for departing talisman Edin Dzeko, who made him the most attractive offer. In his first 2 seasons at the San Siro, Thuram has scored 33 goals and made 23 assists from 94 appearances, winning 1 Scudetto and reaching a Champions League final, and making back-to-back Serie A Team of the Year appearances. Not bad for someone who costs nothing, and whose best years probably still lie ahead of him. Honourable mentions go to Lionel Messi, you may have heard of him, who joined Inter Miami from PSG 7 months after lifting the World Cup, and is arguably still the best player in the world, on the ball at least, Konrad Laimer, who joined Bayern from Leipzig, Alex Grimaldo, who joined Bayer Leverkusen from Benfica, and was sensational as his new club won an invincible domestic double in his debut campaign, and Yuri Tielemans, who left Leicester City for Aston Villa, where he was arguably the club's standout player this season. 2024, Kylian Mbappé. It's boring, but it's true. Signing one of, if not the best player in the world on a free transfer, when they are still only 26 years old and at the peak of their powers, is undeniably phenomenal business. Mbappe's PSG exit seemed likely in 2022, with Real Madrid always lined up as his next destination, but he was swayed by the biggest contract in the history of European football, which gave him powers beyond just being richer than God. Nonetheless, 2 years into what was billed as a 3-year contract, but as it turned out, only if Mbappé wanted it to be one, he took a pay cut in order to realise his dreams of playing at the Bernabeu and, who knows, perhaps even lift the Champions League. As it happened, his former club won their first ever Champions League in Mbappe's first season after leaving, meanwhile Madrid lost in the quarter-finals against Arsenal. Nonetheless, Mbappé had an excellent individual debut campaign, scoring 43 goals in 56 games, which is a record for a Real Madrid player in their first season at the club, beating the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo, Ferenc Puskás, and Alfredo Di Stefano. Mbappé has a long way to go to reach their level of stardom in Madrid, but he also has a lot of career still ahead of him. An honourable mention goes to Tosin Adarabioyo, who I think had a pretty solid debut campaign at Chelsea, especially in that all-important Champions League decider against Forest, albeit he wasn't especially close to featuring ahead of Mbappé. 2025, Tom Bishoff. It is difficult picking out the best free transfer of 2025, partly because it probably hasn't happened yet, and partly because there is nothing to go on, so no benefit of hindsight, as most 2025 free transfers haven't even played for their new clubs yet. Trent Alexander-Arnold might have been the obvious shout, had Real Madrid not paid a reported £10 million to get him through the door in time for their Club World Cup. Meanwhile, Neymar's homecoming at Santos may be the most romantic, and he will likely still be able to make a tremendous contribution for his boyhood club at the age of 33. For now, though, and until proven otherwise, I am going with Tom Bischoff, a very talented German youngster who, like most very talented German youngsters, has been hoovered up by Bayern Munich. Capped by Germany for the first time in the recent UEFA Nations League finals, Bischoff is a versatile midfield all-rounder, highly regarded for his powerful running, dynamism, and fantastic ball control. Already being compared with Leon Goretzka during his early days at Schalke, Bischoff, who is not to be confused with Lotus Biscoffs, which are a completely different thing entirely, they are biscuits, came through the youth ranks at Hoffenheim and, though still only 19, he had already made 70 appearances before his contract expired. Bayern were able to pick Bishoff up as a free agent, though it has been reported that they may have to pay Hoffenheim €300,000 in compensation, which, technically speaking, well, he would still have been a free agent, but not an entirely free transfer, in which case, Neymar, you're in luck. Honourable mentions also go to Kieran Tierney to Celtic, and big old Eric Dyer's move from Bayern Munich to Monaco. Dyer has gone from Lisbon to London to Munich to Monaco. He's out here living his best life. And to think, an England fan stood behind me once called him Eric Diarrhea. Anyway, that is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you found it remotely interesting. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And of course, make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on both for this channel, HITC Sevens, and arguably even more importantly for my other or second channel, Alfie Potshamer, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos, one from each, that you might enjoy watching after this. You can also find me on social media and elsewhere on the internet, usually via the username @HITC Sevens, and you can now become a channel member, should you wish to support me additionally, either on the Alfie Potshamer YouTube channel, or even better, because Google don't take a third of it for themselves, the greedy bastards, via buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potshamer. But more importantly, I hope you all have a sensational day. I'll see you next time. Cheers.